When Kevin and I first moved into that neighborhood, I honestly thought it was the start of our grown-up happily ever after. The house still smelled like fresh paint and dust, and every room echoed when I walked through it with my bare feet. I kept telling myself the silence meant peace, but deep down it just felt empty, like we'd dropped our lives into a stranger's box. Kevin dove straight into work, of course, saying he needed to make the move worth it, while I stayed behind unpacking our entire existence. Most days it was just me, the hum of the fridge, and the sound of my own thoughts bouncing around the walls. I didn't realize back then that loneliness is sometimes the perfect opening for the wrong person to walk right in. I met Hannah on one of those afternoons when I was standing in the driveway pretending to rearrange boxes just so I wouldn't feel so useless. She walked up with this easy smile, scrubs still on, hair pulled into a messy bun, like she'd just stepped out of someone's emergency and into my life. She introduced herself as the nurse from the hospital down the road and apologized for the noise her night shifts sometimes caused, which already told me she cared about people. We started talking about silly things at first: trash collection, which supermarket was cheaper, where to get good coffee nearby. But there was this instant familiarity, like I'd known her for years and we'd only taken a break between conversations. By the time she waved goodbye and promised to stop by later, the house already felt a little less cold to me. It didn't take long before "I'll stop by later" turned into her sitting at my kitchen table 3 times a week, laughing over mugs of coffee that always went cold. We swapped stories about awful exes and crazy patients from her night shifts while I told her how Kevin and I were still trying to find our rhythm after the move. She listened like every word I said mattered, nodding, asking questions, giving advice that somehow sounded wiser than her age. Kevin would come home and say he liked that I finally had someone around, that Hannah was good company, and a sweet neighbor for us to have. Back then, I took that as support, as proof that he cared about my loneliness and wanted me to feel at home there. If I'd paid more attention to the way his eyes lit up when he said her name, maybe I would have seen the storm way before it hit. Our friendship grew so naturally that sometimes I forgot we hadn't known each other forever. Hannah had this way of filling a room, light, chatty, warm, like she carried sunshine in her pockets and just sprinkled it wherever she sat. She'd show up after her shifts with leftover pastries from the hospital cafeteria, claiming they tasted better when shared. I'd complain about the never-ending unpacking, and she'd sit on the floor with me, folding towels or organizing drawers while telling stories that made me forget time existed. There was something almost comforting about her presence, like having the big sister I never had but always wished for. I let her into my home, my routines, my trust. So easily it scares me now to look back on it. Kevin warmed up to her too, just not in a way that raised red flags at first. He'd stay in the kitchen a little longer when Hannah was over, chatting with her about weekend plans or stupid TV shows they both happened to like. Sometimes he'd tease her about her hospital scrubs looking like blue garbage bags, and she'd throw her head back and laugh like he'd just told the world's funniest joke. I'd watch them and think, how lucky am I? My husband gets along so well with my closest friend. You don't want to assume the worst when your heart is still naively convinced you're safe. You tell yourself you're imagining the spark in someone's eyes because you can't bear to believe it's real. And then came the day that rewired something inside me forever. It was a regular afternoon, Hannah knocking on my door like she always did, but with this odd look on her face, like she was nervous about something. I noticed her shirt stretching a little tightly around her stomach, something subtle but impossible to ignore once you saw it. I remember laughing, half joking, half shocked, telling her, "I'm starting to think you might be pregnant." She didn't deny it. She just gave me this tiny, guilty smile, the kind that tells you everything without saying a damn word. In that moment, the air around us shifted, heavy and strange, and I felt something inside me either break or wake up. I still don't know which. The minute that little smile curled on her lips, my heart dropped so fast I swear I felt it hit the floor. I grabbed her hand without even thinking and pulled her inside, shutting the door behind us like whatever truth she carried needed privacy to breathe. She sat on my couch with her shoulders drawn in, almost shrinking into herself, and I remember staring at her belly as if it might suddenly speak and tell me everything. I asked her when she found out, how far along she was, whether she was feeling sick, if she needed anything. My mouth kept running while my brain tried to catch up. But even beneath all my frantic concern, a knot was forming deep inside me, tight and sharp, whispering that something about her story wasn't adding up. I pushed that feeling away, too ashamed to let it grow, too desperate to believe I could help her through something so big. When I finally asked the question that mattered, "Who's the father?" she looked down at her hands like they held the answer she didn't know how to say aloud. She told me she'd met a guy at a bar one night, that it was a stupid decision, that he never contacted her again. I remember feeling this wave of sadness for her, imagining the fear of carrying a child alone, the courage it took to say those words out loud. I promised her I'd help with everything, doctor appointments, groceries, whatever she needed, because that's who I was back then. I wasn't suspicious, jealous, or paranoid. I was her friend, her closest friend. And I thought she was mine, too. If you'd told me then that this moment, the one where I held her hand and swore I'd stand by her, was the same moment my marriage began to rot from the inside out, I would have laughed. Because all I felt as she leaned her head on my shoulder and thanked me through quiet tears was love and loyalty. I had no clue that I was comforting the woman who was about to shatter my entire life. But looking back now, I can see the first crack forming, thin as a hairline fracture in glass. Almost invisible, but fatal once pressure builds. And pressure was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The weeks after Hannah told me about the pregnancy were a blur of errands, appointments, and late-night talks that made me feel strangely protective of her. She'd text me after her shifts saying she was exhausted, and I'd tell her to come over so I could make her tea or heat up whatever leftovers I had in the fridge. I kept reassuring her she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to figure everything out by herself, because in my mind, that's what friends did. And honestly, a part of me was flattered that she trusted me this much, that she leaned on me instead of running to anyone else. I'd never really had someone depend on me like that. Not even Kevin, who acted like emotions were chores he didn't have time to organize. Helping Hannah filled a space inside me I didn't even realize had been empty for years. I threw myself into supporting her like it was my personal mission. I drove her to every prenatal appointment, sitting through ultrasounds, holding her hand when the cold gel made her jump, listening to the doctor explain things I pretended to understand. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at the monitor with this faraway expression, like she was remembering something she didn't want to say out loud. But I pushed those thoughts aside because honestly, I thought she was just scared of doing everything alone. I bought her groceries when she was too tired to shop, helped assemble furniture she ordered for the baby, even reorganized her entire living room to make space for the crib. Kevin joked that I was turning into the world's most dedicated fake aunt, and I laughed with him, thinking he was just being supportive. He started helping too, more than I ever expected. He'd offer to drive us to appointments when he was off work, saying it would save me some stress, and I believed him. On days when Hannah said she was too tired to cook, Kevin would wake up early to make food for both of us before leaving for the office. He even fixed things in her apartment, loose cabinet doors, a flickering hallway light, a broken closet hinge, stuff he never touched at home without me reminding him twice. I told myself he was just being kind, that he respected how much Hannah meant to me. I didn't see the red flags then, no matter how brightly they waved. As Hannah's belly grew, so did the bond I thought we shared. There were afternoons when we'd sit on her tiny couch, her feet propped up on my lap while I rubbed circles on her ankles to ease the swelling. She'd talk about her fears, money, maternity leave, the idea of raising a child alone. and I'd promise her over and over that she wouldn't have to do anything alone. Sometimes she'd cry quietly, letting the tears slip down without wiping them, and I'd hold her hand until she steadied her breathing again. I remember telling her once that the baby would be lucky to have her, that she was stronger than she knew. If I replay that moment now, I can't decide whether I was comforting her or unknowingly comforting the guilt she carried. The day Jake was born felt almost surreal. Hannah went into labor during one of her night shifts, and Kevin drove like a madman to get me to the hospital because he couldn't bear the thought of me being alone with all the stress. I was the one in the delivery room with her, holding her hand while she screamed, shaking, begging the universe for it to be over. The moment Jake arrived, tiny, red, wiggling, I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something pure and protective. I cried harder than I expected, honestly. It felt like watching fate unfold right in front of me, even if I didn't understand yet what fate was really doing. Jake smelled like warm blankets and milk when I first held him. He opened these big eyes, so bright they almost startled me, and I laughed nervously, thinking every baby probably looked like that at first. Kevin came in after Hannah was settled, and he stood by my shoulder, whispering that Jake was adorable, that he looked like a little fighter. I didn't miss the softness in his voice, but I told myself he was just emotional from the whole experience. Hannah watched us with this tired smile, like she was grateful, or relieved, or something in between. And even in that moment, wrapped in all the joy and chaos, I thought we were becoming some strange, beautiful kind of family. The years that followed blurred into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, almost too perfect. Hannah went back to work, and I helped with Jake whenever she needed, picking him up from daycare, keeping him on weekends, letting him nap on my chest while I watched afternoon TV. He'd giggle whenever Kevin walked into the room, reaching his arms out with this pure excitement that honestly melted me every single time. Kevin always said Jake was just a social kid, the kind who loved everyone, and I believed him without a second thought. Looking back, I should have wondered why Jake seemed to love him in a way he didn't love any other adult. But at the time, all I saw was a beautiful little boy who'd somehow become part of our lives. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesdays, Hannah was always with us. She'd come over for dinner, bring wine, help me cook, joke around with Kevin like they were siblings. And I swear, I never saw anything romantic there. I was too busy feeling grateful that life had finally given me a friend who felt like family. We shared every milestone Jake hit. His first steps in my living room, his first word, "Ball," shouted proudly, his first time refusing vegetables at my table. Kevin filmed everything, laughing behind the camera, teasing Jake, teasing Hannah, teasing me. We looked happy, or at least I did. But tiny details started whispering in the back of my mind, little things I brushed off because the truth felt too ugly to even imagine. A joke Hannah made about Kevin's stubbornness that felt too specific. The way Kevin's smile stretched just a little wider when Jake did something silly. A familiar tilt of Jake's head when he was confused, the same one Kevin had when he tried to assemble furniture without instructions. I'd catch these moments out of the corner of my eye, feel a flutter of something rotten, and push it away so hard it almost hurt. Because when you love people, you cling to the story that hurts you the least, even if it's a lie. And still, even with all those whispers tugging at me, I wasn't ready for the day they'd scream. The day I looked at Jake and saw something so familiar staring back that denial crumbled in my hands. The day I noticed the one detail I couldn't unsee. His eyes, Kevin's exact shade of brown, down to the tiny golden flecks that only appear in sunlight. The moment I realized Jake's eyes were identical to Kevin's, something inside me twisted so violently I had to sit down. I remember he was playing with one of Kevin's old baseball caps, the sunlight hitting his face just right, illuminating those little golden flecks in his irises. I froze, literally froze. because Kevin had always joked that his eyes were his best feature, this rare shade that nobody else in his family shared. And now, here they were, staring back at me from a child who wasn't supposed to share a single drop of his blood. My throat tightened, and my heartbeat felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. It was the kind of fear that doesn't scream. It whispers, cold and quiet, "You already know the truth." But I still fought it. I spent days telling myself it was a coincidence, that eye colors overlapped all the time, that I was overthinking everything because motherhood had always been a sensitive topic for me. I convinced myself that Jake's smile only looked like Kevin's because I saw Kevin every day, so my brain was making connections that weren't real. Except, every time Jake laughed, something tugged at my stomach. Every time Kevin ruffled his hair, a strange nausea bubbled up inside me, so faint I kept ignoring it. I kept trying to shove the doubts back into the dark, but they kept slipping through the cracks. I started watching them, quietly. Not in a paranoid way, just attentively, like my senses were suddenly sharper. Kevin would kneel beside Jake, and Jake's entire face would light up as if Kevin were the center of his little universe. Hannah would tense whenever I walked into a room where they were talking, always giving me this startled expression like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. Sometimes Kevin's voice softened when he spoke to Jake, softened in a way I hadn't heard in years, especially not with me. I felt like I was standing behind glass, watching pieces of my life shift into a shape I didn't recognize anymore. The tension kept building inside me until it felt like I was living with a storm pressed against my ribs. Every time Jake did something that reminded me of Kevin, every tilt of the head, every stubborn little pout, I felt that storm swell a little more. I started replaying old memories like a highlight reel I didn't ask for. The nights Kevin stayed out late during Hannah's pregnancy, the way he suddenly cared so much about helping her, the nervous smile Hannah gave him when she thought I wasn't looking. Individually, they were harmless. Together, they formed a picture I wasn't ready to look at directly. One afternoon, when Hannah came over to return a casserole dish I'd lent her, Jake ran straight past me and into Kevin's arms like a magnet pulled him. Kevin laughed, this soft, familiar, fatherly laugh, and lifted him effortlessly, spinning him just enough to make Jake squeal. And Hannah. She froze. Not with surprise, not with joy, with guilt. Her eyes darted to mine for a split second, wide and terrified, and I swear the room went silent around us. Later that night, when Kevin went to shower, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, gripping the comforter so tightly my fingers hurt. I kept hearing Jake's giggles echoing in my head, layered over Kevin's warm voice saying, "There's my boy." He'd said it naturally, without thinking, like the words had lived somewhere inside him for years. My mind tried to twist it into something innocent. Maybe he meant it in a playful way. Maybe I was being dramatic. But my gut? My gut was done whispering. It was screaming now, raw and unfiltered. "They're lying to you." I told myself I needed clarity, something undeniable, before I even dared to confront anyone. So the next day, while Jake napped on my couch like he'd done 100 times before, I stared at him for a long, painful minute. Soft brown hair, same cowlick as Kevin, same gentle curve of the jawline. And then my eyes dropped to his ears. That's what did it. The exact same odd little bend at the top, Kevin's childhood trademark. The detail that left no room for coincidence. The moment I saw that familiar bend in Jake's ear, something inside me just snapped into place. It was like watching a puzzle finish itself against my will, every piece clicking together with cruel precision. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I didn't scream or shake or collapse into some dramatic heap. Instead, I felt this cold clarity settle over me, the kind you get right before you make a decision that will change everything. I realized I couldn't carry this suspicion alone anymore, not without it poisoning me from the inside out. So I decided to talk to Hannah first, hoping, God, hoping that there was some explanation I hadn't considered. I invited her over under the pretense of needing help with something, and she came, smiling like she always did, Jake in her arms. But I could see a hint of nervousness in the way she avoided eye contact, like her instincts already knew something was coming. We sat at the kitchen table, and I tried to ease into it, asking casually whether she'd ever heard from Jake's biological father. She laughed it off, too quickly, saying she didn't waste energy on ghosts, and had stopped looking years ago. And that was the moment my restraint broke. I don't know what my face looked like, but Hannah's smile vanished instantly. I leaned forward and told her, voice steady, heart pounding, that she didn't need to lie to me anymore, because I knew Jake was Kevin's son. Her reaction was immediate and dramatic, tears welling up, breath stuttering, head shaking as she whispered that I was crazy and imagining things. She clutched Jake closer, like I'd accused her of something monstrous instead of something true. She insisted, between sobs, that it had been one stupid night with a random guy, that she would never do something like that to me. But every word she spilled only tightened the knot in my gut, because guilt, when it's cornered, always looks like hysteria. I demanded a paternity test right then, needing something concrete, something undeniable, something that would finally shut down the war happening in my chest. And Hannah, she refused, not politely, not hesitantly, but angrily, defensively, like the test itself was a threat she couldn't risk taking. She accused me of being unstable, paranoid, jealous of her motherhood, desperate for drama. All I saw was fear, pure, trembling fear, radiating from her like heat off asphalt. And that was all the confirmation I needed. After Hannah stormed out of my house with Jake in her arms, the silence that followed felt unnatural. Thick, suffocating, almost humming with things left unsaid. I sat there staring at the empty doorway, replaying every second of her reaction in my head like a scene I needed to dissect frame by frame. The tears, the panic, the refusal, it all lined up too perfectly with the truth she was trying so desperately to bury. But now that I'd spoken the accusation out loud, something inside me shifted. I couldn't unknow what I knew. The suspicion that once whispered had become a steady, cruel drumbeat in my chest. And there was only one other person left who could confirm it without screaming or hiding behind excuses. That night, Kevin came home later than usual, claiming traffic had been a nightmare, even though the streets outside were quiet as a grave. He kissed my forehead like nothing was wrong, completely unaware that I was watching him with new eyes. Eyes that saw cracks and shadows I'd ignored for years. His shirt smelled faintly like the cologne he only wore on special occasions, not on random weeknights, and I felt my stomach twist so sharply I had to steady myself on the counter. He asked how my day was, and I forced a smile, answering with a casual tone that tasted like poison on my tongue. I studied his face as he spoke, every blink, every twitch, every forced chuckle, and I realized he looked nervous, not guilty yet, but nervous the way someone does when they know a storm is forming but pretend they don't hear the thunder. I didn't confront him immediately. I wanted to see how he behaved when he didn't know I knew anything. So I mentioned that Hannah had stopped by earlier, and the way he froze, just for a second, was subtle, but it was enough to slice the air between us. His shoulders tensed before he forced a careless, "Oh yeah? Everything all right with her?" That one question told me everything. His voice dropped just a little, softened in a way it hadn't when he spoke to me in months. And I realized, with a kind of cold dread, that he wasn't asking about Hannah the friend. He was asking about Hannah the liability. The more I watched him that night, the more the truth bled through the cracks he couldn't hide anymore. He kept pacing around the kitchen, opening cabinets, pretending to look for snacks he never ate at that hour. His hands shook. Not a lot. Just enough that someone who loved him as long as I had would notice instantly. And every time I said Hannah's name, even casually, even lightly, his eyes darted away from mine like he was afraid of something he couldn't control. It was the kind of behavior that screams louder than any confession. My heart wasn't guessing anymore. It was remembering, connecting dots I had begged it to ignore. I started revisiting old memories with a clarity that hurt. The nights he worked late, during the same months, Hannah had morning sickness. The time he came home smelling faintly of her vanilla lotion and brushed it off as something from the office. The day he insisted on walking her to her car because she looked tired, but took a solid 20 minutes to return. Back then, I thought he was just being helpful, the good husband who cared about my friend because she mattered to me. Now I could see how stupidly generous that interpretation had been. Kindness had never made a man avoid eye contact the way Kevin did now. I needed proof, something tangible, something he couldn't twist into one of his pretty convenient explanations. So while he showered, I went through the drawer where he kept his watch, loose change, and old receipts. I'd never done that before. I'd never needed to. My hands trembled as I sifted through the clutter, and I told myself I'd stop if I didn't find anything in the first minute. But I did find something. A folded slip of paper shoved so far back it felt like it was hiding. A hospital visitor pass with the date of one of Hannah's third trimester appointments. His name, Kevin Murray, printed in bold black letters. I sat there staring at it, the paper shaking between my fingers, feeling something inside me go completely still. Not broken, not shattered, just still. The kind of stillness that comes right before a person decides they're done being lied to. The kind of stillness that announces the beginning of the end. I held that visitor pass in my hand like it was radioactive, like touching it too long might burn a hole straight through my skin. Everything around me felt distant, the kitchen lights too bright, the ticking clock too loud, the air too thin to swallow. That slip of paper wasn't just proof he'd been at the hospital. It was proof he'd lied to my face, to my heart, to the entire life we'd built together. And what gutted me the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how stupidly proud I'd been all those years, bragging that Kevin was honest, stable, loyal. Turns out the only thing he'd been consistent about was hiding things. Hiding her. Hiding them. When he walked out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming like he hadn't detonated my world, I swear I felt something inside me detach. He asked what I was doing, and I told him, calmly, that I'd found something interesting in his drawer. I didn't throw it at him, didn't scream, didn't cry. I just held it up between two fingers like an artifact from a crime scene and watched the color drain from his face. His mouth opened, barely forming a sound, but nothing came out. No denial, no excuse, no quick lie to scramble behind. He knew the moment he saw it that whatever script he'd rehearsed all these years no longer applied. There was no version of reality he could spin that made that visitor pass look innocent. He sank into a chair like his legs had given out, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the floor, whispering that it was a mistake, that it was one night, that it should have never happened. He didn't even deny Jake, not really, just kept saying he thought I'd never have to know, that he didn't want to hurt me. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. He'd hurt me the moment he stepped into Hannah's apartment, but only cared now because the truth had clawed its way into daylight. Looking at him in that pitiful, crumbling state, I understood something clearly. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry he got caught. And that clarity? It didn't break me. It transformed me. For the first time in years, I felt a calm power rising inside me. Quiet, steady, certain. I realized this wasn't the moment everything ended. It was the moment I began planning how everything would change. In the days that followed his pathetic confession, something shifted inside me in a way I still struggle to explain. I didn't scream or throw things or crumble into the kind of heartbreak people expect from a betrayed wife. Instead, I became quiet. Not the defeated kind of quiet, but the dangerous kind. The kind that comes right before a woman decides she's done asking for honesty and ready to take control. Kevin walked around the house like he was tiptoeing through a minefield, watching me from the corner of his eyes as if waiting for an explosion. But I wasn't planning an explosion. I was planning precision. I stopped involving myself in their false little family dynamic almost immediately. The next time Hannah texted asking if I could watch Jake for a few hours, I told her I was busy. No explanation, no apology. She replied with a confused, "Everything okay?" And I left her on red for the first time in our entire friendship. I knew the silence would unnerve her, that it would sink into her thoughts like a stone. Kevin tried to bridge the tension one evening, awkwardly suggesting we invite Hannah and Jake over for dinner, like old times. I looked at him slowly, letting the silence stretch, and told him there would be no more dinners, no more visits, no more pretending. His face fell, not out of guilt, but out of fear. Fear of losing the comfort of the lies we'd all been living in. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I invited Hannah over, telling her I needed to talk, and she showed up with her shoulders tight, her expression jittery, Jake on her hip. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't need to anymore. I placed the hospital visitor pass on the table between us like a judge laying out evidence. Her eyes widened, her breath hitched, and her knees buckled so slightly she had to grip the chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply said, "You don't have to keep lying. Not to me. Not anymore." I watched her face crumble, not into anger this time, but into a raw, exhausted devastation she could no longer hide. For a long moment, Hannah just stood there staring at that visitor pass, her lips trembling like she was trying to form a denial but couldn't find the breath to shape it. Jake rested his head on her shoulder, completely oblivious, humming softly the way kids do when they feel safe. And that, God, that almost broke me, because none of this was his fault. He was just the living proof of two adults who couldn't keep their boundaries, their promises, or their hands where they belonged. When Hannah finally looked up at me, the fight was gone from her eyes. What remained was grief, and guilt so heavy it practically bent her spine. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, but I wasn't interested in the watered-down version of remorse she thought would save her. I told her I didn't need apologies. Apologies were cheap. I needed honesty, and I needed it out loud. So I called Kevin into the room. He walked in confused, rubbing his temples like he was exhausted from carrying the weight of his own lies. But when he saw that visitor pass on the table, and Hannah's tear-streaked face, his whole posture collapsed. He muttered something like, "Veronica, please," but I held up my hand to silence him. This time, I was the one who controlled the narrative. I made him sit across from both of us, and the air felt thick enough to cut. I told him he could either tell the truth on his own, or I would drag the truth out inch by inch until it was bleeding on the table. He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, before admitting exactly what I already knew. That it wasn't one night. That it wasn't a mistake. And that he'd been helping Hannah behind my back for months. Not out of kindness, but out of responsibility. Hannah started crying so hard the sound echoed through the house like something dying. But the thing that hit me the hardest was realizing how effortlessly Kevin confessed now that he had no more room to hide. Like the weight was finally off his chest. Meanwhile, the weight had just settled onto mine, cold, heavy, permanent. And in that moment, watching the two of them, broken, exposed, terrified, I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful. Because for the first time in this entire twisted story, I was the one they feared disappointing. I was the one holding all the pieces. I was the one they couldn't manipulate anymore. When Kevin finally choked out the words, when he admitted Jake was his son, I didn't scream or cry or crumble. I just stared at him, feeling this strange mixture of disgust and clarity wash over me like icy water. It was almost peaceful, in a twisted way. Because the moment he said it aloud, something inside me clicked shut forever. Whatever tie I thought we had, whatever trust I'd been clinging to like a fool, it died right there on my living room floor. And for once, I wasn't the one begging for explanations. They were. I stood up slowly, letting the tension build, letting them feel the weight of the silence they had created. Hannah was sobbing, holding Jake against her shoulder like a shield, while Kevin looked like a child caught stealing something he couldn't put back. I told them I wasn't going to clean up their mess. I wasn't going to be the emotional crutch, the babysitter, the friend, or the wife holding a crumbling lie together with good intentions and blind loyalty. From now on, their choices belonged entirely to them. And the consequences? Those too. Kevin tried to reach for me, whispering that we could work through this, that couples recovered from worse, that he still loved me. I stepped back before his hand even came close. I told him love doesn't look like secrecy, like whispered visits to hospitals, like building a family with someone else while pretending to build one with me. I told him I'd be filing for divorce. Calm, steady, absolute. And I watched his face fall apart. Not because he loved me, but because he finally realized his comfortable two-world arrangement was collapsing for good. As for Hannah, I looked her in the eye and said the words she needed to hear. No more depending on me. No more leaning on me. No more pretending you didn't destroy the one safe place I had. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing except a fierce, quiet satisfaction. Not revenge in the loud, chaotic sense. Revenge in the dignified way only truth can deliver. Because walking away from them, leaving them to deal with the fallout of the life they created in the shadows, was the most powerful thing I had ever done. And in that moment, I finally felt the ground beneath my feet again. Solid. Steady. Mine. It's strange how life feels both heavier and lighter after you walk away from the people who shattered you. For weeks after I left Kevin, the house felt unfamiliar. Too quiet. Too still. Like it was holding its breath alongside me. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silence stopped feeling suffocating. It started feeling clean, peaceful, mine. I rearranged furniture, donated old clothes, repainted the bedroom walls a soft sage green because I wanted a color that didn't remind me of anything except fresh beginnings. People in the neighborhood eventually learned bits and pieces of what happened. Small towns have big mouths. Some whispered, some avoided eye contact, some tried to offer sympathy I wasn't interested in receiving. Hannah stopped showing up to the house across the street as often, and when she did, she moved like someone carrying invisible bruises. I didn't gloat, didn't jeer, didn't say a word to her again. Jake would wave at me sometimes from her porch, and I'd wave back gently, never with resentment. He wasn't the villain of this story. He was just the reminder that truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. What surprised me the most was the way healing didn't come in a dramatic rush. It came in tiny, almost forgettable moments. Drinking coffee in the sunlight without feeling a knot in my stomach. Sleeping without waking up in a panic. Laughing, real, full laughter at something stupid I saw online. I started journaling, taking long walks, cooking meals just for myself, rediscovering the version of me that existed before betrayal rewired my heart. And little by little I began to realize something I never expected. I wasn't broken. I was rebuilding. Stronger, sharper, softer in the right places and harder in the ones that needed protection. One afternoon, months later, I drove past the old hospital and remembered the ultrasound appointments I'd gone to with Hannah. I remembered the joy, the excitement, the tenderness I once felt helping bring a new life into the world. For a second, I thought that memory would hurt. But it didn't. It just reminded me of how deeply I'm capable of loving, how much I gave, how much I survived, how far I've come since the day I realized my marriage was a lie. That love wasn't wasted, it was redirected, back into me. So now, when people ask how I managed to move forward, I tell them the truth. I didn't heal by forgiving them. I healed by choosing myself, by refusing to carry the weight of someone else's betrayal on my back, by walking away with my dignity intact and my head held high. And if there's one thing I've learned, one thing I'll never forget, it's that sometimes the most powerful revenge a woman can have is rebuilding a life so whole, so peaceful, so unshakably hers, that the people who broke her no longer have a place in it.